Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Depending on where you are in this world, God bless you. This is Gloria White coming to you from Utah, USA. You know, um, I am really trying to press through the scriptures, the prophets, the prophecies. I just finished reading Revelation in the New Jerusalem Holy Bible, and I want to start in Halley's Bible Handbook. I would like to read about the prophet Isaiah. He's a messianic prophet, called the messianic prophet because he was so thoroughly imbued with the idea that his nation was to be a messianic nation to the world. That is, a nation through whom one day a great and wonderful blessing would come from God to all nations. And he was continually dreaming of the day when that great and wonderful work would be done. The New Testament says that Isaiah saw the glory of Christ and spoke of him. And that's in John chapter 12, verse 41. The man Isaiah. He was a prophet of the southern kingdom, Judah, at the time the northern kingdom, Israel, was destroyed by the Assyrians. Isaiah lived in the region of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. His call was in the year of Uzziah's death, but some of his visions may have been earlier. See on 6:1. He was slain, according to Jewish tradition, by Manasseh. Tentatively, we may place his active ministry at about 745 to 695 BC, before Christ. Rabbinic tradition has it that Isaiah's father, Amos, not Amos the prophet, but a brother of King Amaziah. This would make Isaiah first cousin to King Uzziah, the grandson of King Joash, and thus of royal blood, a man of the palace. His literary work. He wrote other books, which have not been preserved to us. A life of Uzziah is in 2 Chronicles 26:22. And a book of the kings of Israel and Judah, 2 Chronicles 32:32. He is quoted in the New Testament more than any other prophet. What a mind he had! In some of his rhapsodies he reached heights unequaled even by Shakespeare, Milton, or Homer. His martyrdom, a tradition in the Talmud, which was accepted as authentic by many early church fathers, states that Isaiah resisted Manasseh's idolatrous decrees and was fastened between two planks and sawn asunder, thus suffering a most horrible death. This is thought to be referred to in Hebrews 11:37. And we do know that Manasseh was a horrible, wicked, idolatrous king. And Isaiah called him out right straight to his face. And Manasseh hated him for it, and he crucified him. He sawed him in two with a wooden saw. And God took Manasseh in chains with a hook in his jaw. In chains he crawled. He couldn't lift up his head to the Lord, but he cried out to the Lord. He repented of all his evil doings. He said the most beautiful prayer of repentance, and God heard him, and God felt him, and he knew that it was true, that he really felt repentant, and God forgave him and brought him back and set him up in his kingdom. And he turned the page from a wicked to good, and he did everything to destroy every idolatrous, wicked, evil thing out of the whole entire land. People can turn from the most wicked, horrible kind of life and be forgiven. God's mercy, it covers everyone. Everyone who wants to receive it can have it if they truly want it, if they truly seek forgiveness in their heart. He will be faithful and true to forgive you and to give you eternal life. Oh, if he could forgive Manasseh, he could most certainly forgive you. It's nothing you've done that he doesn't already know about anyway. It's a matter of humbling yourself before him as a sinner, recognizing and acknowledging that you've sinned and that you're sorry. Continuing, Assyrian background of Isaiah's ministry. For 150 years before the days of Isaiah, the Assyrian Empire had been expanding. As early as 840 BC, Israel, under Jehu, had begun to pay tribute to Assyria. While Isaiah was yet a young man at 734 BC, Assyria carried away all of North Israel. 13 years later, Samaria fell, and the rest of Israel was carried away. Then, a few years later, the Assyrians came on into Judah, destroyed 46 walled cities, and carried away 200,000 captives. Finally, 701 BC, when Isaiah was an old man, the Assyrians were stopped before the walls of Jerusalem by an angel of God. Thus Isaiah's whole life was spent under the shadow of threatening Assyrian power, and he himself witnessed the ruin of his entire nation at their hands, except only Jerusalem. Archaeological note. The Isaiah scroll, all original copies of Bible books, as far as is known, have been lost. Our Bible is made from copies of copies until the invention of printing AD 1454. These copies were made by hand. Old Testament books were written in Hebrew. New Testament books were written in Greek. The oldest known extant complete Bible manuscripts date from the 4th and 5th centuries AD. They were in Greek, containing, for the Old Testament, the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament made in the 2nd century BC. Seeing pages 402 through 412, 750 to 756. The oldest known existing Hebrew manuscripts of Old Testament books were made about 900 AD. On these are based what is called the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Old Testament, from which our English translations of Old Testament books have been made. The Masoretic text comes from a comparison of all available manuscripts, copied from previous copies by many different lines of scribes. In these manuscripts, there is so little variation that Hebrew scholars are in general agreement that our present Bible text is essentially the same as that in the original books themselves. Now, in 1947, at Ain Fashkaha, about 7 miles south of Jericho, 1 mile west of the Dead Sea. Some wandering Arab Behudins carrying goods from the Jordan Valley to Bethlehem, searching for a lost goat in a wadi that empties into the Dead Sea, came upon a fairly collapsed cave, in which they found a number of crushed jars with protruding ends of scrolls. The Behudins pulled out the scrolls, took them along, and passed them on to St. Mark's Syrian Orthodox convent in Jerusalem, who turned them over to American schools of Oriental research. One of these scrolls was identified as the Book of Isaiah. Written 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years older than any known manuscript of any Hebrew Old Testament book. An amazing discovery. It is a roll written on parchment about 24 feet long, made up of sheets about 10 by 15 inches, sewed together in a script of ancient Hebrew with evidence that it was made in 2nd century BC. This and the other scrolls had originally been carefully sealed in earthenware jars. Evidently, they were part of a Jewish library, which had been hidden in this isolated cave in time of danger, perhaps in the Roman conquest of Judea. Essentially, it is the same as the book of Isaiah in our Bible, a voice from 2,000 years ago, preserved in the wondrous province of God, confirming the integrity of our Bible. W.F. Albright calls it the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. See 1948 and 1949 issues of Bulletins of the American Schools of Oriental Research and the Biblical Archaeologist. Now, don't you think it's very interesting that in 1948, oh my goodness, that they were turned over in 1948 and 1949 issues of Bulletins of the American Schools of Oriental Research and Biblical Archaeologist, when Israel became a nation in May of 1948, which marks the beginning of the final Earth Age, the beginning of the final generation, and the coming of Christ. Oh my goodness, huh? Remember, Daniel said that knowledge would be increased. Well, I think finding these books was a great increase in knowledge, because it wasn't just Isaiah that was found there. There were many books, the apocryphal books, that were found as well. Enoch, Esdras, the Maccabees, all of them worth reading. Jubilees, Jashers. Although Jashers was more like a Hebrew, what do they call that? I can't remember the word. Hebrew, sort of like their legend, like a legend, like it was written like a legend. It was really good. I have it recorded if you want to go listen to it. Okay, let's continue. The grand achievement of Isaiah's life was the deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrians. It was through his prayer and by his advice to King Hezekiah and by the direct miraculous intervention of God that the dread Assyrian army was discomfited before the walls of Jerusalem. See chapters 36 and 37. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, though he lived 20 years after this, never again came against Jerusalem. Contemporary kings of Judah. Uzziah from 789 to 735 BC. A good king, long and successful reign. Jotham, 749 to 734 BC. Good, mostly co-regent with Uzziah. Ahaz, 741 to 726 BC. Very wicked. Him and Jezebel. See under 2 Chronicles 28. Hezekiah, a good king. See under Chronicles 29, 2 Chronicles 29. He reigned 726 to 697 BC. Manasseh, 697 to 642 BC. Very wicked. See under 2 Chronicles 33. Manasseh was so evil that he set up the idols, and he sent even his own newborn child through the fire to the god Moloch. Ugh. Horrible, horrible. The things that he did. He set up false idols all over the country. Contemporary kings of Israel. Jeroboam II from 790 to 749 BC, a long, prosperous, idolatrous reign. Jeroboam. Zechariah, 748, assassinated Shallum in 748. Menahem, 748 to 738 BC, extremely brutal. Pekahiah, assassinated by Pekahiah at 748 to 730 BC, captivity of North Israel. Hosea in 730 to 721 BC, Samaria fell in 721 BC, end Northern Kingdom. Archaeological note. Sargon. In Isaiah 20 verse 1 it is said, Sargon, king of Assyria, sent Tartan and fought against Ashdod and took it. This is the only known mention of Sargon's name in extant ancient literature, thus mentioning the name of a king never known to have existed, the critics said, was one of the Bible's blunders. But amazing to be told, in 842, Bada discovered the ruins of the Sargon's palace in Khorashabad on the north edge of Nineveh, with treasures and inscriptions showing him to have been one of Assyria's greatest kings. Yet his name had disappeared from history, save this lone mention in Isaiah, till Bada's discovery. In recent years, the ruins of Sargon's palace have been excavated by the Oriental Institute. On the next page are reproductions of photographs of the ruins of Sargon's throne room, his throne, and the great stone bull which guarded his doorway. From inscriptions it is learned that Shalmaneser died while besieging Samaria, and that he was succeeded by Sargon, who completed the capture. Furthermore, verifying the statement above quoted from Isaiah 20 verse 1, the inscription of Sargon says, Azuri, king of Ashdod, planned in his heart not to pay tribute. In my anger I marched against Ashdod with my usual bodyguard. I conquered Ashdod and Gath. I took their treasures and their people. I settled in them people from the lands of the east. I took tribute from Philistia, Judah, Edom, and Moab. And so here are some pictures, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm trying to balance my hand so it doesn't shake. I know people say, well, you can pause it, but most of the time when I pause something, it's that bigger arrow in the way and it's hard to see. The first figure said, throne room in Sargon's palace excavated. Base of throne is seen at far end. At left is the central doorway. So the throne base was here, and the door is there. Doesn't look like much to me. Maybe in person it would be more impressive, but they discovered this and that's what they made of it. Okay, in figure 51, great winged human-headed bull carved out of stone, 16 feet high, stood at the doorway of Sargon's palace. So here is this 16-foot high bull here. And it stood at the doorway. And then down the bottom one it says, figure 52, base of Sargon's throne, 12 by 15 feet, 5 feet thick, with sculptured size representing Sargon in his chariot on the battlefield, while officers pile up before him a pyramid of heads, typifying his brutal military prowess. That was quite a lot of work that they did on that carving there at the base of the stone of his throne. I think this book is so enjoyable because it has so much history in it. And then it gives us pictures that we don't normally see in our regular everyday Bibles. So that's just makes it that much more interesting to me. Coming judgment for idol worshippers. It was in Isaiah 2, 5 through 22. Suffering and captivity ahead for Judah. In chapter 3, verses 1 through 15, including the fashionable ladies of Jerusalem. And that's in chapter 3, verses 16 through 26. Like the ladies of luxury in Samaria. Amos in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. 7 women to 1 man is in chapter 4, verse 1. Because the men will have been killed in war. The coming branch. And this is in Isaiah chapter 4, verses 2 through 6. This is Isaiah's first mention of the future Messiah, the branch, reviving out of the stump of David's fallen family tree. And that's in Isaiah 11, verse 1, and in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 2, Jeremiah 23:5, Jeremiah 33:15, Zechariah 3:8 and Zechariah 6:12. He would be the one to purge away the filth of Zion and make her a blessing to the world. Chapter 5. A Song of the Vineyard. A sort of funeral dirge. After centuries of most extraordinary care, God's vineyard, his nation, fruitless and disappointing, is now to be abandoned. Jesus' parable of the vineyard, Matthew 21:33 through 45, seems to be an echo of this parable. The sins here specially denounced are greed, injustice, drunkenness. The vast estates of the rich, accumulated by robbery of the poor, soon were to become wasteland, gone into captivity. Chapter 13. Like chapter 53, the future is so certain that it is spoken of as already past. Then, too, at that time, a large part of the nation already had gone into captivity. Sin with a cart rope. That is, excuse with depravity, by scoffing at the idea that God would punish them. Invading nations from far would be chapters 25 through 30. Assyrians in Isaiah's own, in chapter 5 this would be verses 25 through 30. Assyrians in Isaiah's own time, Babylonians, who 100 years later destroyed Jerusalem, Romans, who at AD 70 struck the death blow to Jewish national existence. Bath, in verse 10, that is 9 gallons, a homer 11 bushels, an ephah a bushel, that is the harvest shall be much smaller than the planting. This is when God was going to punish them. You know, God will punish with famine. He'll make the crops fail. He'll bring a drought. He'll bring hail. He'll bring all kinds of reasons, harsh winds that will cause the crops to fail. Now, I'd like to go to Matthew 21:33 through 45 and read that about the vineyard, because as it was prophesied, as if it had already occurred in Isaiah. So if we go here to Matthew, I wish you guys could talk to me and help me remember. 21, Matthew 21, verses 33 through 45. 21, 33 through 45. Matthew, chapter 21, verses 33. Here another parable. Here was a certain householder, which planted a vineyard, and hedged it round about, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants, and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his Son, the Messiah, saying, They will reverence my Son. But when the husbandmen saw the Son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what do you think he will do unto those husbandmen? They say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their seasons. And verse 42 is an unfulfilled prophecy and says, Jesus saith unto them, Did ye never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected is the same, is become the head of the corner? That is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Verse 43, Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. And verse 44 is an unfulfilled prophecy. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. Verse 45, And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spake of them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. And they ran away, scared. Good for them that they ran away. Of course, we know that they just kept coming back, trying to find ways to crucify him. They finally just had to lie, because there was no truth in anything that they said against him. Not a word. Even Pontius Pilate knew that. He even washed his hands in front of them and said, I wash my hands of this doing. I find no reason for this man to die. And so that takes us to chapter 6 in Halley's book of Isaiah. And so we'll stop there and pick up there the next time, God willing. And as always, I love you.